Warning, some viewers may find the following footage deeply disturbing.
Genius.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kurt Wallace Show on RandPaulReview.com. We have a special guest with us today, Austin Petersen. Austin has run for the president on the Libertarian ticket, ran to become presidential candidate on the Libertarian ticket, and has been the producer for Andrew Napolitano. He's a talk show host now, has a morning show called Wake Up America. And what else? We have you. What's your you have a new endeavor. It's a web publication. Could you talk about that as well?
Well, yeah. So, hey, good to see you, Kurt. And
Good to
it's
see you as well.
nice to see you and chat with you again. I remember back in the good old heady Ron Paul 2008 days, seeing Kurt Wallace. I probably listened to a lot of your shows on the dailypaul.com. So for those who are old school enough to remember those days, it's nice to give those shout out to the old Daily Paulers.
Thank you.
Those are great days. But I built a merch website. I kind of felt like for a while the problem with a lot of our Liberty merch is that you got all these patriotic people out there, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just everybody's got the "Don't Tread on Me" AR-15 shirt, right? But like it was kind of it was time for us to have a little bit of fun and silliness in our part of, it's that old Edmund Goldman quote, "I don't want a revolution without dancing," right? So if you go to my website forlibertyshop.com, you feel like you're gonna have fun. It's a little naughty, it's a little silly, it's a little funny. It's taking the ideas of liberty and marketing them in a way that is appealing to people who are, I don't know, just not your typical average patriot, right? But a patriotism with a point and a good pun or two and silliness. So it's been a fantastic endeavor, actually, because it's fascinating that everybody's like, oh, it's just another merch shop, it's just a grift, blah, blah, blah. But I actually have impacted hearts and minds through this, because when I created a Javier Milei sneaker, it became an international sensation. People in Japan were buying my Javier Milei sneakers. He showed in a video, he showed the sneakers when he was at Mar-a-Lago with Trump after the inauguration for the party and stuff. So, oh yeah, people were calling me news organizations were saying, "Can you speak Spanish and come on TV down in Argentina?" I'm like, damn, I can't speak Spanish, unfortunately, so I missed some opportunities. But I hear from people all the time. Yeah, I hear from people all the time that they love it, and it sparks great conversations. My latest effort has been to sort of support the ideals of Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk with the Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. And of course, our old boy Ron Paul is out there apparently offering some tips about how to slash the deep state. And that's very exciting. And, I'm here to sort of operate as I always kind of have, as a mercenary for liberty, and a freedom fighter as much as I can be, same as I was dailypaul.com when I was checking the dailypaul.com every day.
And at that time, we weren't able to use the term deep state without being considered some kind of weird conspiracy theorist. If you talked about the Constitution back then, we're talking about 2007, 2008, and a lot has transpired since then. And that's really what we want to talk about today, is this influx of libertarian ideas in the national conversation. And it has really taken hold. It's taken hold because of what happened during the Ron Paul Revolution, the Tea Party, and then, with Rand Paul and some other people going into the Senate and Congress, Amash and Massey, and then MAGA. MAGA started to make its way in, very disruptive, and essentially Trump turned the Republican Party into a completely different party, destroyed the Democrat Party and the Libertarians as well. But we've had a lot of fallout in the Libertarian parties outside of the parties themselves, and that practical kind of conversation around that. The ideas have infiltrated, and you have written a manifesto. This manifesto is on human events, and we will share this in the notes. Definitely want people to go and read that and consider the ideas that you're presenting. You always challenge libertarians and disrupt and upset libertarians when it comes to the purists, those who have a very specific idea. We need everybody to come to us and think our way, and let's go ahead and dismantle the state and have everybody self-govern and that sort of thing. And there's all kinds of extremes. I don't know that that's not a bad thing to have those type of people, to keep sort of a baseline or a compass that maybe that's north. But in reality, your manifesto is to say, look, actually, let me ask you what the overall theme of the manifesto is, rather than trying to break it down myself.
No. I think it's good. I mean, in some ways, I think for some people it will be a breath of fresh air. And I've heard from people who have read it who have said, finally, somebody is saying, explaining what it is that I've been, where I haven't felt like I'm not a libertarian, they say, but I'm not a Republican. I'm not a conservative. Like, they understand the different viewpoints, but they're like, I'm somewhere in between. Some people have toyed with the idea of conservatarian, right? And that's kind of been thrown around. But I like the idea of libertarian nationalism, because the nationalists hate it and the libertarians hate it. But the people who are libertarian nationalists, they like it, right? And you talked about, like, the ideas of different schools of thought on libertarianism, right there. And I actually gave a speech. It's a really good video that people can watch on YouTube. It's called the 10 different types of libertarianism. And in it, I identify the approximately, and there are more, 10 different schools of thought that there are, with, hyphenated libertarian, right? Geo-libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, minarchist, constitutionalist, classical liberal, and there are subtle nuances and differences between them. But the problem, of course, is that with that factionalism, just like you have in any other kind of, like, when you have factionalism, I mean, the Mormons think they're correct, right? The Baptists think they're correct. The Catholics believe they're correct, right? And they're all sort of variations on the same thing, Christianity, but they all, hold themselves to be sort of like the repository of, like, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And whereas I tend to think that, I take a little bit more of a heterodox approach, and I'm willing to say, well, let's cherry pick, let's take the best from every view and combine them into what seems to be the most effective and most ethical, moral, logical. And for example, objectivism, Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, is in conflict with libertarian views in many important, meaningful ways. In fact, she did not like libertarians. She famously stated that, that we were hippies and et cetera, et cetera. And, she made good points. And she conflicted with libertarians and it took a dim view of us. However, we libertarians kind of like, we're like, oh no, what, we can't reject Ayn Rand. She's definitely part of the ecosystem. It's definitely part of Ayn Rand is libertarian canon as far as I'm concerned. Even if she just says it's not, I believe that it is because of the capitalism, over that. But she had some differences in foreign policy, and objectivists have differences in foreign policy with American anarcho-capitalists and with, classical liberals and Ron Paulers, right? Ayn Rand did not agree with the non-interventionist foreign policy of the modern American anarcho-capitalist movement, and the American anarcho-capitalist movement is very different from the anarcho-capitalist movement or the liberty movement of Argentina, where there's been sort of this disenfranchisement, I feel like, that's been going on with American libertarians, and we're kind of racing to catch up because libertarian ideas do quite well when they're not advanced by libertarians themselves. And I think part of that is because of a cultural nihilism which exists amongst the American liberty movement. Nothing matters. Nothing ever changes. Don't vote. Don't run for office. It's all going to collapse, and the sooner it can collapse, the better. And Javier Milei has proven that not to be true. And now what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are doing with the Department of Government Efficiency, I mean, it's almost as if now libertarians in the United States have to say, oh, damn. Oh, you mean not only can we accomplish something, but if we don't accomplish something, it's our fault. Nobody wants to say it's our fault it's the government's fault for oppressing us and keeping us off the ballot. It's the American people's fault for being too stupid, right? It's like that Simpsons gif, like, is it, am I out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong, right? And that mindset needs to come to an end. The problems that we have as libertarians in the United States, I would say 9 out of 10 times are problems of our own making. And so I throw down a challenge, I throw down a gauntlet, noting that there will be a violent rejection of many of the ideas that I have, but that I pose them to get people to think and to question some of our most even deeply held beliefs, and ask if whether or not the non-aggression principle is going to be the savior of Western civilization. Spoiler alert, I think it's not going to be. That's not. People are like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm throwing the baby out and keeping the bathwater. The non-aggression principle, I think, is a fundamental flaw in American libertarian ethical and moral viewpoints, especially when applied to foreign policy. And I think that it's part of the reason why the American people would never trust any noted libertarian who advances a foreign policy based on it in any kind of position of power. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is not a libertarian. I mean, she has some civil liberty instincts, as the head director of national intelligence, but she's nowhere near an isolationist or even a non-interventionist in the sense of that you or I might consider someone to be a non-interventionist.
Okay, let's go through. You said a lot, and for the people that are listening who are not libertarians, let's talk about why this matters today. And what I mean by that is we're being affected by the ideas of libertarianism, regardless of the different factions in the liberty movement or libertarian type or libertarian leaning types. Maybe talk about the attraction that these ideas have had, which has created a coalition, practical coalition that is not expected. And I mean, at a year ago, would we have expected to have the type of cabinet that Trump has developed? The people that are involved in it, a lot of them are on the left, traditionally left. They voted. What's the Rogan supported Bernie Sanders? Is that correct? In his previous time,
Yeah.
That's not a principled shift from Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump. But the ideas of libertarianism, I guess to start off with, because I do want to get into the shortcomings and define non-aggression principle and just war theory and that sort of thing on the policies, on the foreign policies, but just to get our listeners a baseline on why this matters to them, that we're talking about libertarians if they're not libertarians or they don't really understand libertarianism. Why does this matter for them right now?
Well, like you said, it is impacting our current policies, and people that you may not be aware. People like Vivek Ramaswamy has called himself a libertarian nationalist, and that was kind of what piqued my interest, because in analyzing the philosophical views of the presidential candidates in this last cycle, I was a big supporter of Vivek Ramaswamy, and when he was proud enough to call himself a libertarian nationalist, I thought, he's not a dummy. He knows what he believes, and now he's empowered with Elon Musk to create an admittedly outside of government agency to recommend cuts. And sure, you got to get Congress to authorize it and pass a bill to send to the president of the United States. But I have high hopes for them to make, even if they make even small changes here or there. I think that will be a big victory for people like ourselves who want to see fundamental, real cuts made to the bloated bureaucracy. If we can get leaner, meaner government, smaller government, that government is best, which governs least. If we can get at all, any cuts whatsoever, right, as we've been hurtling towards the cliff, anybody that's throwing brakes and sand in the eyes of our opponents, is in my mind doing a good thing. And so if Elon and Vivek manage to accomplish even some small victories with Doge, I think it will be a lot because of the result of the ideology that's behind Vivek Ramaswamy and the people who have supported him and put him into a position. Elon Musk seems to be more of an instinctual libertarian, where Vivek is an intellectual libertarian. Elon arrives at his libertarian principles, it appears, more through like common sense deductive reasoning and a sort of a very calculated, like rational view, and because of a there appears to be like it's very difficult to there's an emotional quality to it, which you might say is like an empathy for his fellow humans. There's a sort of an empathy that he has, whilst also noting that he's a business owner, that he knows how to exact. He is also a tyrant. He knows when to be a dictator, right? He walked into Twitter and fired, everybody. He knows how to keep a lean, mean organization, right? These are qualities that libertarians have to have, right? You have to have a ruthlessness in business and capitalism, and through his ruthlessness and his capitalistic impulses, he's built empires, business empires. Libertarians could stand to learn from that, right? We have a lot of libertarians who quack a lot about capitalism, but they don't do much to engage in it, right? So there's an instinctual libertarianism there, and I think to a smaller extent, Donald Trump also has that. There's an instinctual libertarianism to Donald Trump because of as a byproduct of his capitalistic impulses, right? So his libertarian impulses are tied into his understanding of how markets work, because as a businessman, he's been uniquely hamstrung, like anyone else who started a business, in what regulations and red tape and things like that can do to you. Now, when it comes to things like tariffs, for example, I think a lot of of Trump's positions don't, he's not arriving at them out of, he's not a philosophical capitalist in the sense like, Hans Hermann Hoppe may be, right? But he's kind of an instinctual capitalist, which means he will make mistakes, right? And he won't understand that, necessarily that the invisible hand of the free market may be operating in a way that creates unintended consequences to the best. I could tell he wants what's best for the United States. It's obvious he loves America, and he thinks that tariffs are a good way to protect people in the United States. Well, I tend to disagree, because, and I love America, and then I love the United States, and I want to have the best outcomes for us and our economy, which is why I'm opposed to tariffs. So I mean, you have to sort of look at the United States where it's at and understand that even though Argentina seems to have a miracle, in order for them to get their miracle, they had to go through, unfortunately, pain and suffering on a magnitude that I would never wish upon the American people. But that said, there are lessons to be learned, and important lessons to be learned. And we have seen in the American right, leftists obviously discard Javier Milei, but we have seen like Hans Hermann Hoppe, and we have seen, Dave Smiths, and we have seen, some of the bigger names in the liberty movement in the United States kind of turn their back on Milei, or to, lift their nose up at him. And it's specifically because of their foreign policy focus and interest, which I believe is rooted in a series of contradictions that all stem from one poisoned well, which I think is the non-aggression principle. And we can get into that more if you like.
Let's do that now, because the non-aggression principle applies in different ways. And can you have a set of principles that are going to be compromised in sort of a societal structure where it applies locally, but it doesn't apply outside of our borders? Can you have that? And where does the just war theory play a role for you specifically? And then also, how do you apply that to concerns around corporate interests? And I mean, when you talk about the military industrial complex, it's, is it socialism to a degree to go tinkering? Why would you have a decision for that kind of conflict? So where does that lie for you as a libertarian? Where do you make those decisions, and what is the principle that you would work with? Or
great questions. Lots of great questions. And I'd love to answer them all. I should have written each one down in succession there. But in regards to the non-aggression principle, what I might replace it with is something like the common law approach, right? Property disputes are resolved through longstanding principles of possession, contracts, and trespass. Like if a neighbor builds a fence on your land, the dispute is settled by reviewing property deeds, surveying boundaries, determining intent under property law, instead of calling it aggression, right? The common law would focus on legal remedies like injunctions or compensations, right? but like
Mhm.
the NAP like breaks everything down into like, is it aggressing? Well, what are you aggressing against? So private property, like it leads to this like these series of absurdities. And when you talk about like, isn't it socialism to like interfere with these other countries? Well, socialism is central planning and central control of the means of production. If I'm an American capitalist per se, and I invest, let's say, in an oil refining company in Iran, and let's say it's the 1940s or 50s or what have you, and I've invested my own good hard-earned money in there, hoping that that's going to build the economy 10, 15 years later. Well, then all of a sudden, theocratic fascists decide to overthrow the government of Iran and install someone else, and to overthrow property rights, and they install socialism, and their socialism seizes my means of production. And you might understand how some people in the United States might be like, well, I'm really glad that the CIA committed Operation Ajax and overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in the 1950s, and because the people who were coming in were socialists and the people who were being thrown out were the capitalists. And it's kind of like, because I've watched all the same conspiracy documentaries as every other libertarian. And the problem is that many of them were written by, narrated by, especially the foreign policy ones, by leftists, by lefty social democrats. And there is a lot of what I would say an unfortunate ideological overlap with leftist communists when it comes to the views of American libertarians on foreign policies. And I know where that comes from. It comes from the antiwar.com Institute, where a sizable percentage of the people who work there, whose job it is to be anti-war, what have you. A sizable proportion of them are leftist communists and socialists, and who view the United States as irredeemably imperialist, imperial power. This is the ideology of those who want to tear down statues. These are cultural and moral relativists. And I think that there's a little bit of this ideological bleed over from cultural nihilists who would say, for example, look at the United States, the pioneers and the manifest destiny and the expansionist view of the pioneers, and say we are living on stolen land. And this woke, and there's a wokeism in American libertarian foreign policy that holds anti-war to be like the most. You're not virtuous if you won't fight. You're just weak. If you can't fight, you're weak. And if you won't fight for what's true and what's just, then you're not a good person. You're actually a very bad person. You're actually an evil person in my mind. And the problem with the just war theory, and this is something I've read for a number of years, especially working for Judge Andrew Napolitano, who is a very strict pre-Vatican II Catholic, who believes very much in the just war theory. It's a Christian philosophy. So if you're not a Christian, then sometimes the arguments that they use in there may or may not hold up. Sometimes it does make sense, and some of the tenets and practices, I think it makes sense. The only problem, of course, Kurt, is that having spent 20 years in the libertarian movement, I haven't found a single libertarian who says a single war was ever just. What was the last just war? I mean, what some might say World War II, but actually a lot of libertarians now are saying actually it was the United States' fault. Actually Winston Churchill was the ultimate bad guy of World War II, not Adolf Hitler. No, it was Winston
the Revolutionary
Churchill.
War, I guess, would be.
Well, then, if so, then you might be a libertarian nationalist. If you look at the American Revolution and you say that that was a just war, then killing is not always wrong. And as a matter of fact, you have to take the good with the bad, because even in the war, the American Revolution, there was collateral damage, right? Some of the loyalists, for example, the colonists, the patriotic colonists, the 3% that we always tout, they burned and looted and destroyed and killed their fellow American citizens. It wasn't just shooting redcoats on the field. We were fighting our brothers. This was a civil war as much as it was a revolutionary war. And you think that no civilians were killed in the American Revolution? There were. There were civilians killed in the American Revolution, but how come? Harry Truman, S. Truman, is the greatest monster war criminal of all time because he nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki to save American lives and to protect American lives. But George Washington is not as equally evil a war criminal as presiding over the American colonists who murdered their own countrymen, sometimes in cold blood, because they were loyal to the King of England. So it's all of these. There's these paradoxes which occur, and if in some ways, do you see what I'm saying?
Sure. So that brings me to the kind of the conclusion question of my diatribe set of questions, which I apologize for hammering you with so many at one time, but
It's fine.
I think maybe this lies possibly in the non-interventionist perspective. Where is the line? Where is the set of principles that doesn't compromise the American values, in favor of the banks and the corporations that benefit from pushing war, the neocons, the
That's a great question.
that have infiltrated
Sure,
the
sure.
Republican and Democrat Party. Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. It's like if you think we should have a military, and if that military is to be supplied with arms, do you have a Soviet socialist system where the government creates the military, the government creates the arms, or do you have a private system where private arms dealers can manufacture weapons and sell them to who they choose? So if you're a capitalist, then you're for a military industrial complex. If you're a socialist, then you think the government should be creating bombs and creating tanks and building those things. I don't think the government is very good at doing many things except killing people and breaking things, and stealing our money and doing other things, right? That it's noted for. But when it comes to the question of like a military industrial complex, you must listen to what Eisenhower said when he said guarding and preserving our institutions and our democratic processes against this vast armaments industry. But he said we are compelled to create it, meaning that we have to watch out for it. We have to keep it under our watchful eye, but we have to have it. And so, that's sort of a paradox. It becomes paradoxical, and limiting principles are important, and holding on to constitutional checks and balances is important. But truth and justice predate the Constitution. The freedom of speech says in the Constitution, the freedom of speech, meaning that the freedom of speech existed before it was written down on a piece of paper. And the Ninth Amendment even acknowledges that there are more rights and privileges that American citizens, are granted or exist that we can't even write down in this entire document. So they wrote down the Ninth Amendment to sort of cover all the bases of all these other things. Justice, right? Does justice predate the Constitution? Of course it does, right? The Constitution and the system that we create is just the means to the end. But I think sometimes people really get caught up in the means of securing liberty, the means of protecting freedom and of national security, and they attach some sacred meanings to the processes. But as we've already noted, the process itself has become corrupted over 280 years. The system that we have right now is definitely not working. It's bloated. It's unmanageable. So it certainly shouldn't be kept as sacred, right? The problem with like a conservative mindset is that all it's doing is conservatism. All it's doing is conserving progressivism from 20 years ago. Bring us back to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Donald Trump. These are Democrats from the 1990s. Okay, they're not conservatives, right? These are Republicans that are not conservatives. They're just 1990s Democrats. Okay, so in some ways, right, it's very much just conserving 20, 30 years ago, right? Whereas libertarianism and the concepts of the truth and justice and individualism, those are revolutionary concepts, right? And it's all pretty much only Vivek here in the United States who's kind of like saying, we don't want to control the institutions, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, and have our people run the FBI. We want to abolish the FBI, don't we, guys? Right, guys? don't we? So I mean,
thank you to the Rand Paul Review community for your support of the Kurt Wallace Show. We are now syndicated on Spotify. For those who are new to Rand Paul Review, become a subscriber today. It's absolutely free to join. Go to randpaulreview.com, put in your email address. You'll receive our newsletter, articles, and podcast interviews. We just ask that you share our content with others. If you like what you're getting from Rand Paul Review and you want more, I encourage you to become a paid subscriber for just $8 a month. You'll receive full access to exclusive articles, behind-the-scenes interviews, and the community chat room. Plus, we're giving away tons of swag in 2025. Annual subscribers get 20% off, so check that out. Whether you're a free or paid subscriber, thank you for your participation and support at randpaulreview.com. Sure. So that voice in there brings sort of the classical liberalism and those pieces into the mix, but does the shortcomings of the leaders or the voices, the loud voices. You mentioned a comedian. You mentioned, some other people. Ron Paul is one of those that probably would fit in there as being kind of a purist. He's Dr. No. He voted against his own bills and that he would put into circulation at Congress, and because they would add pork to it and change it. And by the time it came back, that wasn't the bill he wrote. So he would even vote against his own stuff. He voted against his own party many times. But is that a shortcoming? Is that, would you call that a shortcoming? Where are the shortcomings?
Not necessarily. I mean,
right now?
No. And I think, we have Amish in this country, and it's an experiment in religious liberty, and they're not like really part of the system. They are free riders to the extent that they benefit from our national defense whilst not contributing to it in the form of federal income tax, and bully for them. And I love that, and that's a great system for them. And if there are any anarcho-capitalist libertarians who would like to set up their own little hippie communes in, the wilds of Alaska, and to the greatest extent that they're not free riders on a system that they're not paying into, and they want to live in that sort of a system, I think, that a libertarian nationalist approach would allow that for that experimentation. But without the nation state, we cannot defend ourselves against the type of foreign threats that would kill a Ron Paul, slice the throat of the comedian, and use their bodies. Evil exists. It will never not exist. We will always have, that's why we keep our guns. The Second Amendment exists because we know that evil will always exist, and tyranny is always just around the corner, one generation away from extinction, right? And the government, right, is just the means with which we try and protect civilization, which is not to suggest necessarily that taxes are the price to pay for civilization. It's not to suggest that is necessarily true, but to suggest that there's this common phrase that libertarianism, that libertarians, especially anarchists, love to throw up on bumper stickers. You'll find that it'll say something like it's like about fighting, where it's like, like good ideas don't require force. And let me tell you how wrong that is. It's people will, if good ideas don't require force, then why is it that my child wants to eat candy instead of vegetables? Nobody wants to eat their vegetables. Everybody wants candy. Good ideas, you're damn right, good ideas require force. That's what the Second Amendment is all about.
And you're talking about that, people are excited about RFK being head of the FDA, in a sense, having that kind of control. Where do you draw the line on using government force to stop companies from producing poisonous chemicals in our food? Is that free market capitalism?
It is. It is.
So you kind of question.
It is. Yeah. When I go to McDonald's, I know what I'm getting. When I go buy a bottle of whiskey or Everclear, I know what I'm not drinking, like Happy Sunshine and Rainbows. I know what I'm doing. I'm pouring poison down my throat. I know it's poison. It's labeled as poison, and it says it's poison, and that's what I want. I want my sweet, delicious double quarter pounder with cheese, a big French fries. I'd prefer it to be fried in beef tallow. But the reason it's not is not because we haven't banned enough things here in the United States. It's because we subsidize all of the cheap stuff that they're using to mass manufacture a lot of these things. If people paid the actual costs for these things, the marketplace would tell us really quickly that, we don't know how cheap. Here's the thing: people don't want to eat healthy. All right. A lot of the dyes that people are complaining about, for example, that you'll see like the Food Babe and all these people complaining about, oh, this dye is toxic, it's poison. Yeah, they took that out of the food, and actually, you know what happened? Americans complained, and they had to put the dyes, and they had to put the sugars and all that stuff back into it, because they realized that Americans don't want to eat Canadian food. It tastes like crap. We don't eat like Europeans. Americans do. Like, there's something to like the argument for this is a free country. You have the right to eat snackums and sugar and blow up and die at 50 pounds. Now, the healthcare system that has to pay for it, that's another question entirely. But I don't like the whole RFK Jr. faction that says, that I shouldn't have the right to decide what I want to eat. But nobody has the balls to call out and say, oh, why don't we go after the subsidies? Oh, no. Well, what happens, Kurt, when you're still subsidizing something and you ban it?
Well, so the whole idea around state corporatism is alive and well, and that I don't know that gets enough play. Also, in terms of information, the powerful corporations determine what kind of information you're going to get and how sexy a particular product is, and so the narrative is also a part of the discussion, and having somebody in the position. I'm playing devil's advocate to what you're talking about, but if RFK has that position to say, hey, these things kill, these things cause cancer, these things cause diabetes, these things make you sick, these things harm you, they're addictive, and of course you're going to like them because of the way that they are, but these, let's take a look at, shine light on that. Is that
right? Well, I mean, he purports himself to be an expert, and I guess we should just trust the experts, right? If there's anything that we've learned over the last few years, it's that it's always a good idea to trust the experts. I trust every expert, especially when they have a government. If they've got an R after their name, yes. If they got a D after their name, I don't trust them. No, I tend to be skeptical of anybody in authority. And RFK, while he said, I actually think that about a third of the things RFK Jr. says are, pretty good ideas. And I think, and I like the idea that. Well, I like the idea that they're going to investigate try and find a causal link between the vaccination schedule and early childhood autism. And here's the thing: I'm willing to change my mind if they find new information. I think there's probably not a causal link. I think it's more of a correlation causation fallacy that's occurring with parents in terms of timing and things like that. I'm willing to be convinced. I've heard plenty of evidence on the other side, but nothing quite really truly convincing for me in terms of a causal link. But if RFK Jr. actually has the power of government and they do a study and they can't find a causal link, that puts it to bed, right? Now, some people will never change their minds, right? Even if they're confronted with enough evidence. Still, there are people who are still wearing masks inside cars alone. So it's clear that some people are incapable of being educated or learning, truth or separating fact from fiction. But things like that. Too. Yeah, it's a psychosis. Exactly. Well, I think the food stuff. I think the food stuff is a bit of a psychosis. I think that there's a bit of a food psychosis that goes on, and what they do is that they hide the words toxic and poison in when it may not necessarily be toxic or it may not necessarily be poison, or not everybody. I think there's probably a lot of genetic factors that come into play, right? We don't. It's like the parents who want peanuts banned because their child has a peanut allergy. Excuse me, but I think that people should have the right to enjoy peanuts on a plane if they want, and that's their own thing, as long as they're not coughing them in the face of the child who has the peanut allergy and different things like that. But
what about cigarettes on a plane?
Yeah, I think you don't have smoking flights if they want to smoke. You don't have and if
you could pick a smoking flight and a non-smoking flight.
Yeah,
kind of
why are we having a one-size-fits-all smoking policy? Yeah, I think people are going to smoke less and less. I don't think it'd be financially feasible, But I mean, I resent the government that tells me I can't. I resent the government that tells me I can't smoke. I don't smoke. I resent the government. It makes me want to pick up cigarettes. I resent the government that tells me I can't eat McDonald's. It makes me hungry for a nice cheeseburger.
Rebellious nonconformist and the libertarian.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like it when the government tells me I can't or I shouldn't. But I mean, if you want to say it's toxic, then you got to have then I need to know why you think that and what are the parts per million, because I think a lot of the problem that comes with the food stuff is that it's a problem of dilution. They're like, oh my God, it's got mercury in it. Well, which kind of mercury? What do you mean, which kind of mercury? Well, there's two kinds of mercury, ethyl mercury and methyl mercury, right? Which one does it have in it? Well, I'll find out and I'll come back, right? And all that's happening is a lot of bias confirmation. And, it's not popular for me to say these things to this group and people and all this stuff like that over the years. It's, I understand I made a lot of enemies. A lot of people resent me because of these kinds of views, but I mean, somebody's got to call bullshit sometimes, Kurt.
Well, let's talk about, in the final part of this podcast, let's talk and define libertarian nationalism and what that is and who in prominent positions you could kind of apply this label to.
When I think of libertarian nationalism, I think of Vivek Ramaswamy. And I think you could apply it to Vivek and to Elon and to some extent Trump, but very, minimally. I would say, Javier Milei is probably the poster child for it because of his realist views when it comes to foreign policy and his acknowledgement. He doesn't apologize for civilization. He has a sort of an Ayn Rand view when it comes to civilization. When a barbarian and a civilized society are fighting against one another, you always root for the civilized man in some sense, right? Like if the non-aggression principle is causing you to root for Hamas or for Hezbollah or for Osama bin Laden, then, maybe somewhere along the way there was some kind of lapse in judgment. I don't see that. I don't see that from Javier Milei. And a libertarian nationalism rejects the non-aggression principle. It also rejects a secessionist view of the United States, one that advocates that we would be freer if the states were to dissolve the bonds that hold them together. I disagree with that. I think that would actually result in less liberty. It's not to say that secession is always wrong. The United States was a perfect example, seceding from the United Kingdom. And I think that if we're going to have secession, it should just be Northern California should break away from Southern California and form a new state. And then we'll have 2 more Republican senators. But Washington, D.C. should never be a state. We shouldn't be talking about breaking up the American Union. We should be talking about adding to the American Union. We should be adding to the prestige and power of the U.S. Constitution, and the ideals of the Declaration of Independence should extend over broader swaths of territory. For example, Cuba, there should have an option for one day there should be an option for a national referendum, and Cubans should have the opportunity to democratically vote if they wish to join the citizens of the United States as the 51st state. And we should consider that. And then Greenland. If there is such a time, it should make sense. If we could get a Napoleonic, Louisiana Purchase style deal from in terms of Greenland, they're not really using much of it, and we should expand. And if
there's lots of resources in Greenland aren't being tapped into. No.
That's right. They're not using it. And then there's Alberta in Canada, which is full of lots of conservatives and despises the leadership of their country to a large extent, right? Justin Trudeau and the leftist tilt of Canada. And if here's the thing, if people like Trudeau really believe in democracy and the will of the people, give the province of Alberta a national referendum to become the 51st state of the United States. And then you tell me how much these people believe in. Then you'll see, we know that to them it's really a joke. This whole, democracy, our democracy. We know it's not a joke because it's just like, for example, Brexit. Brexit was another perfect example. They love democracy until the idiots voted for Brexit, and then it's, oh no, we can't have the will of the people. So libertarian nationalism is an unapologetically pro-American, pro-civilization, not making apologies for the pioneers, not crying tears on the side of the road for the Native Americans, who were a vicious, infighting warrior tribe of people just as much as the pioneer settlers were. Not apologizing for George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, despite their sordid history of slave ownership. Not apologizing for them. Every single statue that's been torn down should be restored to its rightful place. Every military base named after a Confederate general should be permanently enshrined. And we make no apologies for American history. It's good and it's bad and it's ugly. But we do not no more cultural vandalism, no more nihilism, and no apologies for civilization. The civilized man over barbarism.
How would you define the difference between a libertarian nationalist perspective and MAGA Republicans? Where's the departure there?
The departure would be in something like trade policy. So, for example, rather than initiate a tariff, like increase taxes on the American people, if you really want to encourage domestic production, you need to cut regulations here. You need to do things like get rid of the minimum wage. You need to real pro-worker policies are going to arise out of the agreements that can be formed when you don't have unions that are empowered and can force. You need right to work, right? And a lot of right-wing populists are not fans of that because it is anti-union. And so that is where libertarian nationalism separates itself from MAGA, is its key, would solve our economic problems through deregulatory agenda rather than a tax and regulatory agenda.
Okay. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Austin Petersen, where can listeners find you?
Yeah, so I think if they like this, I'm sure this infuriated a lot of your listeners, and if they would like to come and argue with me,
I'm going to be texting you and emailing you some information.
Please do. But it's very much meant to be. It's meant to be a challenge. It's meant to be not a spit in the eye, but
we should be having these conversations and pushing back on one another. No question. Love it.
Yeah, for sure. And these are right. And it's not like I'm not talking bad about your mother. You know what I mean? So it's like it's not personal, right? So just, don't take it personally, engage. And so if people want to engage with me, they can watch my show. It's called the Wake Up America Show. It's 5 days a week, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time. And the best place to watch it is at rumble.com/AP for Liberty. And it's the number 4. rumble.com/AP for Liberty. And if you go to rumble.com/AP for Liberty, you'll find my show. You'll find my merch shop with all my fun merchandise, my Javier Milei sneakers. And you'll find I have other shows as well. I've built a whole network now. So there's more podcasts as well from other young rising stars that I'm developing. So check it out. Keep an eye on it.
That's great. I had actually in 2007, that was the name of my show. Wake Up America Show, and it was on Ron Paul Radio. Then to Break the Matrix. Do you remember Break the Matrix?
I remember all of it. Yes, absolutely.
Ron Paul Revolution Radio, and then Daily
Paul.
Yeah.
Daily Paul, Ron Paul Revolution. Man, it really is great to talk to you because there's very few people still around from those days, and I'm glad to see that you're still here and you're still fighting the good fight, Kurt.
Well, I think that what is happening right now is a direct result of the Ron Paul Revolution. I don't know that anybody's really defined that in writing, or have you seen anything out there where anybody's kind of defined the connection?
You know what? I think very few. I mean, some people will acknowledge it. You'll hear it sometimes, but you don't really kind of see the sort of like dissection or analysis that you used to. But what I remember distinctly is that there came a time when I and maybe some other people, started to realize that Ron was not going to be the president. I think I probably figured it out, by the end of his first campaign. And I still campaigned for him again the second time because I still love the ideas and still wanted him to win and at least do the best he can to kind of keep the ideas going. And I ran for president myself in 2016 as a way to kind of like act as a bridge, a stopgap to keep the movement alive and keep the momentum going as much as I could, because we were kind of like losing steam around 2016, if you remember.
Yes.
But we used to say back in 2008 that because we had spawned this revolution, we used to say that, you know, when Barry Goldwater ran, he got wiped out, he lost, and then he spawned the Reagan Revolution. And in some ways, we may be seeing that happening now. Is that it's like what Barry, when the time for choosing speech was delivered by Ronald Reagan, everybody knew that he would be a star and that one day he would come out. Now, I don't think there's as much comparison to Ronald Reagan versus Trump necessarily, but there are some very important historical comparisons that absolutely can be made from Ron Paul to Donald Trump.
I love it. With that being said, thank you, Austin, for joining today. And yeah, let's do this again sometime soon.
Please do. And thank you very much for the invitation, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.